Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everybody. Before I dive into my sort of prepared remarks, I have to be honest, I've never had an HR job in my life. Um, I have been the CEO. I was the CEO of Taco Bell for about 8 years and then the CEO of Yum for 5 years. But I've never had an HR job. My background is marketing. So I'm a marketer by sort of profession. So you're probably even wondering why the heck am I even talking today? And I guess the answer is, it's funny, I will actually get in, I love quotes and wisdoms and things like that, right? And there's a great Picasso quote, oh, we've heard it. It says, I'm gonna read it. It says, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And so I thought, oh, well, the meaning of my life is marketing and brand building, and the purpose of my life is to give that away. But then I guess having been a CEO for 13 years, I realized as much as I have a passion for brand building, I'm actually writing a book on brand building and all this sort of crazy stuff. I think I learned that it's really about leadership and people, and certainly having run it's a division of the same company, but having been the CEO twice, it was really all about how do you get an organization through culture to perform better. And I think that's where it first started. And so the journey for me as the CEO was, first of all, getting the organization to believe that culture fuels results. And then having sort of got the organization to buy into that, the question was, well, who are the leaders who deliver the best results? And the answer is the ones who inspire. And then actually to Cindy's point, I think a lot of people go, well, I'm not Winston Churchill, so I will never be an inspiring leader. And what I hope to convince you today is you don't have to be Winston Churchill, because there's a lot of non-Winston Churchills that are incredibly inspiring leaders. So, and then I'll get to answering all the questions about, how do we handle just sort of the burnout, the mental health. And what's also interesting is I'm on a couple of public boards, and I can assure you at the board level, mental health of employees and particularly mental health of leadership and the leadership teams is really front and center for a lot of boards today. So hopefully as HR experts and professionals, you will appreciate that boards, at least the boards I'm on, are very conscious of sort of mental health and what's happening. So anyway, I'm going to, this is my first attempt to sort of do a sort of 18-minute, I'm going to try and keep it short because I know we're running a bit late. So anyway, so I guess it gets back to, there's that quote. And so I think my aha was in retirement, which is, well, is my gift really to give away brand building, or is it to sort of help with leadership and how to be more inspiring and how to use culture and inspiration to deliver better results? I think we all want to work in an organization that has a great culture. And that's just because we're humans, and you want to work in a nice place or a horrible place? The answer is you want to work in a nice place. But I don't think everyone truly believes that culture and inspiring leaders fuel results. And what I'm going to try and demonstrate to you today is they absolutely do. And the beautiful thing about having 140 countries, 3 brands, and 1.7 million employees, we've got all the data to prove that culture does fuel results and that the most inspiring leaders fuel even better results. So I'm going to try and convince you of that. I guess that's my starting point. Sorry. So what's interesting at Yum is that we actually give people a culture score. So every year you get a performance score, and the performance score is, I guess, really simple. It's either like, you're excelling, you're achieving, or there's an opportunity. We try to keep it really simple. It's not like a 10-point scale or a 7-point scale. But then we also give you a culture score. And the culture score is one of 4 things. You're either learning if you're new, you're lacking, that's not good, as it's obviously, you are living the culture, or you're leading the culture. And the best place to be is obviously someone who leads the culture, not just lives the culture. And I think that's what's really interesting is there was a lot of discussion, therefore, by people when you give them a score. First of all, the lawyers didn't particularly like it, I'll be honest, because the performance rating is sort of KPI driven. The culture rating is obviously subjective, and the lawyers, to be honest, really didn't like it. But so what? There's a lot of things we do that lawyers don't like. But obviously the big question was, well, if I'm living the culture, how do I become someone who leads the culture? And what the hell is the difference between living and leading? Because like everybody, if I'm living today, I want to be someone who leads the culture. So what do I have to do? So we created a 1-day class, which I taught, I think, 19 times in 11 countries around the world. And so I guess to sum up, what is someone who lives the culture? And by the way, living the culture is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. So if you live the culture, you know, you make critical decisions, you develop bold ideas, you're personally accountable, you know, you recognize the team, and you talk about what I found, you talk about the what and the how. So what do you want done and how do you want it done? But for someone who leads the culture, I think the descriptions are that we've used are they empower courageous decisions, they champion bold ideas, they're actually vulnerable. And I got to say, as an Australian, you can probably tell by my accent, um, I have found Americans, and I am also now a US citizen, so I'm sort of, I guess, preaching the converter, but I have found Americans to be really terrible at being vulnerable, particularly compared to a lot of other cultures. You've got to be a cultural role model. You've got to hold others accountable. You've got to have a passion for recognition. You've got to connect sort of business strategies with the values of the organization. And then finally, we said you've got to be inspiring. And that was sort of where we had the big aha, which was the leaders that performed the best at Yum, and we have thousands of leaders, were the ones that obviously were really inspiring. And that was sort of, we did a whole bunch of data. We looked at all the things that we described people and scored people and a whole bunch of stuff. And so we said if we want to improve our performance, then we have to have leaders that are more inspiring. And so having taught the organization that culture fuels results and got the organization to believe it, the next thing was to say, well, can we teach you to be a more inspiring leader? Is that a teachable proposition, or is it you're just born inspiring and you either are inspiring or you're not inspiring? If the answer is you're born with it, then that's not really good, because it means we can't get more of our leaders to be inspiring. Now, what's really interesting is, and again, so there's now a class I teach, even though I'm sort of semi-retired, there's a class I teach, which I'm now doing virtually, obviously, called Inspiring Others to Fuel Results, which is what we're talking about today. But one of the interesting things, and I'll ask you, and you can all give me an answer here, is if you've got someone who drives for results on the one hand, and someone who motivates and inspires, so there's sort of two characteristics. If you're great at drive for results, but not great at motivating and inspiring, what do you think is the probability of being an extraordinary leader? So on a scale of 1 to 100, if you drive for results, but you can't motivate and inspire, what's the chances of you being a truly great leader? On a score of 1 to 100, who wants to have a guess? Okay, but give me a score. So you drive for results are good, your motivate and inspires is not good. What's the probability of you being an extraordinary leader? 1 to 100, just give me a number. It doesn't matter. Now we're going to go the other way. I'll give you all the answers. So the other way is, so what if you are great at motivating and inspiring, but you don't drive for results? Who wants to guess the sort of number that make the probability of you being a sort of extraordinary leader? So the opposite. Okay, so this is all the data we used, and this is now, as I said, 1.7 million employees, 140 countries, 3 brands. If you drive for results, but you're not good at motivating and inspiring, the probability of being an extraordinary leader is, drum roll, 5%. If you motivate and inspire, but you do not or cannot drive for results, the probability of you being an extraordinary leader, drum roll, 10%.
Oh, still low.
If you are both, the answer is 85%. And I think it was one of the earlier questions that people were talking about, which is, you know, command and control is obviously dead. We have a lot of command and control leaders. But anyway, I always find it fascinating, because when I teach the class, everyone has the same sort of response. But basically, if you're good at one or the other, you're not going to be an extraordinary leader. You basically have to be good at both motivating and inspiring, and at the same time driving a result. So I guess it's the sort of challenge Cindy taught us. So when we started telling the organization that we need more inspiring leaders, the answer was, well, I'm not Winston Churchill. I'm not John Kennedy. I'm not Indra Nooyi. I'm not Oprah. I'm not any of those people, right? And so I think the first thing we had to convince people was that to teach you to be a more inspiring leader is not about you having a personality change or changing your style. It's actually about, like everything in life, teaching you some skills that if you use, you will become a more inspiring leader. So, you know, I guess my response to the, you know, everyone has to be Winston Churchill is things like Mother Teresa was, I think, an inspiring leader who probably never gave a speech in her life. You take J.J. Watts, the footballer, who just does so much great stuff in his community, but he's not the guy who sort of gets on his soapbox. And Malala, you know, the young lady that was shot in Afghanistan because she wanted to get an education, who won, I think, the Nobel Peace Prize. I would argue that she's not a Winston Churchill or an Indra Nooyi or a John F. Kennedy either, but I think all of those people are inspiring leaders. And so, you know, the key, I guess, for us at Yum is, you know, we can help you be more inspiring without changing who you are. And so we think there are 5 things that we then end up teaching people to help them make them more inspiring leaders. And those 5 are, you know, can you set a clear vision? But most importantly, can you explain the why? And as I said earlier, what I have found is a lot of leaders are great at explaining the what. Then they unfortunately tell people how, and what they never tell anybody is why. So the first one is set a clear vision, share the why. I'll go through some of these a little bit. The second is communicate powerfully, but obviously, and making sure your message sticks. The third is to collaborate authentically. And to some extent, that's about choosing a mindset. So we can talk about mindset, particularly with what's going on right now. The fourth is to foster innovation, but also be the catalyst for new ideas. And then the last one is obviously, you know, develop people by giving them work that challenges them. And this whole idea of providing people with challenging work was really clear. So I'm just going to quickly go through these 5. As I said, it's like a whole day class. Well, I'm not going to bore you to death, but I think the key message I want you to take away is I truly believe you can teach people to be more inspiring without having them go through some personality change. And that really is the biggest mindset we had to overcome. So the first one, which is this setting a clear vision and explaining the why. As I said, my experience having been a CEO for 13 years was a lot, and this is at leadership at all levels, is that leaders tend to say what they need, what they want done, but they then tell people how to do it. And I think telling someone how to do something basically takes away any sort of initiative and self-motivation. You're just a drone, you know, I want you to do this and this is how I want you to do it. So we're going to play another little game. I need you to help me here. So what 2 numbers make the number 5? Right. So there is a million ways to get to 5. And a lot of times it doesn't really matter how the heck you get to 5, but what not great leaders do is they go, you have to use the 4 and 1 method, or you have to use the 3 and 2 method. But if you say to someone, look, I want you to get to 5, this is why I want you to get to 5, but you choose, you know, you choose how you get there. That's incredibly empowering because all of a sudden they are a part of the solution because they got to choose it. I jokingly used the example when I was growing up, you know, I had to mow the lawn and I couldn't go out before I mowed the lawn, but, you know, and my dad really wanted it mowed, you know, up and down, but I was like, hey, I do circles and I do crisscrosses and I do, you know, diagonals. Because the answer is, what's it really matter? The lawn got mowed. And I think what happens with a lot of leaders is they get caught up in the how, and it's usually the how the way they did it, which is not empowering, and not obviously getting into the why. And there's just leaving the how alone. Look, I'm sure, you know, how you build a bridge, there's a how you build a bridge, and I'm sure to do open heart surgery, there's a how, so we shouldn't leave everything. But in our businesses, I think we can leave a lot of the how up to the individual, and I think that's incredibly empowering. So long as they know you want to get to 5, why you want to get to 5, let them work it out. It can be 7 minus 2, it can be, you know, 4 plus 1, as we said. So, and then I think the other thing is, when you have a clear vision, is really making it simple. I used to call things obsession metrics when I ran Yum and Taco Bell. And at one stage running Taco Bell, the organization had one objective, just one objective. And I called it an obsession metric. And it was to make the tacos full, you know, because they weren't full at the time. And everyone was like, oh my God, you know, the restaurant's going to be dirty. The burritos won't be full, you know, all hell will break loose because we've got an obsession metric. But what I found is really interesting is if you give someone 10 things to do or 20 things to do. I had a boss who gave me blue chips, green chips, white chips. I didn't even know what colors meant anything. I had no clue what the priorities were. And so here's my example. So if I give you 10 things to do and you do 7 of them, then we're going to have an interesting end of year chat. You're going to think it's pretty good. I might think it's okay. But, you know, there's this whole dialogue around is 7 out of 10 things good. If I give you 1 thing to do, there's only 2 outcomes. You either did it or you didn't do it. We don't even really have to have a conversation about the result. What we can have a conversation around is actually, you know, why you did or didn't achieve the result. And so I think that even today, business leaders and organizations set way too many objectives. And if you're in a consumer-facing business, if you set 20 things you want the consumer to see differently, you will make little progress on 20 little things, which the customer won't see, I'll just be honest. And therefore, you won't change the customer perception. So we wanted to change full tacos, I'll be honest, from 62% to at least 90. It's the only thing we focused on for 6 months. And in 6 months, we went from 62% to 92%. And obviously the customer could see that because about every 1 in 2 orders at Taco Bell contains a crunchy taco. The other surprising thing is all our other ratings went up because we made a huge change to something that really was the core of the business, which was a taco. So I think having obsession metrics and getting your bosses to have less objectives, and I think in the time of coronavirus, it's really important to have less things to do, not more things to do, but choose the right things to focus on that will have an impact to your customer. Anyway, so that's the first one. Set a clear vision and make it really simple and be obsessed and talk about the why. The second one is to communicate powerfully. I think someone said it earlier, which is right now we've got to be, honest about the past, realistic about the present, but optimistic about the future. I don't know who said that, but I've stolen it, and I think it makes absolute sense. And I think that the key thing as a leader is to make sure that what you say obviously aligns with your own personal behavior. And again, I'm on 3 boards, and what's interesting when I'm seeing the CEO talk to the organization, the other thing that really is important is sharing personal moments. So sharing how you as the leader are personally struggling with what's going on. Like, well, I've got a son and a daughter, or I've got kids at school, or I think that to the organization, the fact that the leader can be vulnerable enough to say, hey, this is really having at a personal level, I mean, at a real personal level. So like David gives every time he has a chat with the organization, he succeeded me. He has a chat every 2 weeks, and he starts it off with, okay, what's been happening in the Gibbs family? Well, we couldn't see grandma for her birthday. And so I think it just humanizes leaders to let the rest of the organization know they're going through exactly the same thing. They can't visit parents or grandparents. They can't visit friends. They can't do this. So I would encourage as HR people, I would encourage your leadership to really be honest and transparent at a very personal level about how this is impacting them, so that people don't think, well, they're in the ivory tower and their life is different. But then also making sure that your own personal behavior, whatever that is consistent with what you say. And I think people obviously, it's the one thing I underestimated when I became the CEO is everybody hangs on everything you do and say. I mean, this is not sort of literally true, but I remember sort of saying, well, that wall would look nice if it was painted blue. And about 2 days later, someone painted a wall blue. I hadn't asked for the wall to be painted blue, but I sort of said, oh, I wonder what that would look like if it was blue. And the next thing I know, I got a blue wall. So I think making sure that people are watching everything you say and all your actions is also important. And then the other thing about communicating powerfully is being a great storyteller and telling stories, not just facts and not, charts and not data points and not bullet points, but sort of telling stories. And I go back to why I think storytelling is so important. If I said Humpty Dumpty, what would you all say?
Sat on a wall.
Sat on a wall, right? You would say sat on a wall. Okay, when you learned that Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, you couldn't read and you couldn't write, but you remember it. Now, I want you to remember 1/100th of the stuff you learned at school. Answer, can't remember a half or anything I learned. I mean, you can obviously, but you know what I mean? So once we can read and write, it doesn't mean we learn anymore or retain anymore, because everybody knows Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, and yet we couldn't read and write. Why? Because Humpty Dumpty sitting on the wall is a story. So we need to get into storytelling as the way to communicate powerfully. And again, you don't have to be on a soapbox to tell a story. You just got to tell a story rather than telling facts and figures. And because no one remembers facts and figures, but everyone remembers a story. And if you go back to really ancient cultures, like the Aboriginal culture in Australia, nothing is written down. It's all storytelling. And that's how things were passed from generation to generation. Anyway, I think the last thing is, don't make yourself the hero. Even if you're telling your personal life experiences, like we can't see grandma and we can't do this, don't make yourself as the leader, the hero. That's the last thing you want, is to come across as, well, I was able to, because I'm rich and wealthy, hire a jet and fly my kids to see grandma. No, they're not the stories you tell the organization. Anyway, but highlight your personal struggles, keep it simple. Anyway, the third one is to collaborate authentically. And I think that the energy and excitement that comes from being part of a collaborative effort is obviously, much better than if it's everyone's sort of doing their own thing. And I understand that in large organizations, because Yama's the large organization thing, different parts of the world, restaurants were shut down, restaurants haven't been shut down. Some you can use the drive-through, some you can't. But I think to inspire people, it's about saying we're all in this together. And yes, your part of the story may be more affected or less affected, but telling the holistic story about, hey, we are all in this together and we've got to obviously come out the other side together, even though right now it may be having, like restaurants were shut down in the UK, even the drive-thrus, which made no sense to us, but hey, they were shut down. In the US and Australia, yeah, drive-thrus were open and we could obviously still do business. So I think the most important thing about being authentic means you have to have the courage to be vulnerable. And as I said earlier, Americans you're really terrible, at being vulnerable. You actually suck. You are the worst country out of about 140 I've ever visited. It's funny because when I was in California running Taco Bell, I used to see the back of the thing, my kid's an honor student, right? And, whatever, goes to wherever. And I was like, are there no dumb people in America? Like, is everybody an honor student? Because every freaking minivan's got an honor student on the back of it. I think we actually relate to people who are vulnerable. I actually think vulnerability is a critical. Great leaders are incredibly vulnerable. They'll admit their mistakes. And the reason it's important to be vulnerable is because then you'll learn, because you realize you're not perfect and everything you do isn't perfect at all. Obviously, mindset matters. What beliefs you have coming into this issue, what assumptions you're making. Are you making the right assumptions? What data did you use? Were you open to data, or, have you got a mindset of, I know the solution? Making positive connections and, I guess, seeking solutions for positive gain. The fourth one is fostering innovation. I love this whole, I guess, as HR people, have you all heard of the acronym for FEAR? FEAR. Okay, I use it as false expectations appearing real. So most of the things we're fearful of actually never happen. So I'm fearful of getting on the plane's going to crash. I'm fearful of going to get hit by lightning. I'm not saying there's a 1 in a bazillion chance it happens, but for the number of people that are fearful about things, these things never happen, yet they essentially stop us from performing. And so I think that overcoming this sort of fear of failure in particular, and particularly right now, is sort of a key to inspiring a culture to actually, do better. Yeah, no one's going to hit it unless you probably work in, I guess if you work at Clorox, you're going to, your sales numbers will be fantastic, right? But for a lot of us, the numbers are going to suck. So, the numbers suck. Just because the numbers suck doesn't mean we're failing. It just means that we're in this unprecedented crisis. I mean, is it Heather who's at Sinopolis? I love your cinemas, by the way. There was one where I used to live in California. Obviously no one's going to go to the cinema. And so I think you have to be honest and let people be vulnerable that, their performance is not, how hard they're working in their performance is not at the moment directly correlated to results. And that's just life. And it can't be taken personally. But I also think you need to have a culture where even today you're being innovative. You can't stop the innovation. I mean, I always jokingly say, you can't do innovation on Thursday afternoons from 2 to 4. You actually have to have a culture that encourages innovation, but also accepts failure without obviously, massive repercussions for failure. So I think, and the other thing about leadership is a lot of people think, well, as the leader, you've got to have all the ideas. And the answer is no, you just got to be the catalyst for innovation. And I have a lot of stories at Yum where other people invented things. Everyone thinks I invented them because I happen to be the CEO, but I didn't invent them at all. But you have to be the catalyst to either create an environment in which innovation occurs, or actually sometimes see the actual big idea that other people can't see. And there's a lot of examples of, I think, I'll give you a quick example. Crunchwrap, I don't even know what Crunchwrap is. It's like a hexagon shaped product we sell at Taco Bell. And we were trying to make Taco Bell years ago more portable. And what we were chasing was, we wanted to make the classic taste of Taco Bell more portable. So this lady, Lois Carson, phoned me up one day. I was the chief marketing officer. And she says, can you come down and have a look at a product? Well, I go down and I look at what is Crunchwrap. So I think, oh, well, she's had this, driving to work this morning, or she's in the shower, she's had this inspiration. And I said, oh, when did you have this idea? She's like, oh, you're the 5th chief marketing officer I've shown it to. I would say, I worked it out because I asked someone the other day, Crunchwrap in the last 12 years has added $4 billion of sales to Taco Bell. Because, and it's not my idea. I didn't even have the idea, but it was actually seeing someone else's big idea. Viewing failures as learning. And as I said, you don't have to be the innovator. And the last one, the 5th one, developing people. I think it's about, really having honest discussions with people. I know you're all HR people and I'm not. I really hated filling in forms. I got to be honest. Because I thought forms were just sort of so we've got a process without actually ever having a good discussion. And so I never had the same discussion with 2 people. I would fill in the forms and then I'd sort of say, well, we'll hand those in, let's have a talk. I think having real honest to God, just real discussions about people's current performance, about being honest with their current performance, about their future potential. I think we say to a lot of people, oh yeah, you've got a lot of potential and you'll do this. And the answer is we know they're not going to do it. Yet we somehow, because they're sort of what I call the B team, I mean that in this disrespectful way, they're the people that work at B's that get stuff done. We go, well, Billy and Mary, they do great jobs, they get stuff done. And maybe we can keep them in those jobs, but that's not inspiring leadership. And that's not really giving the people who work for them leaders who can obviously inspire. So there's an interesting thing. There's this book, if you haven't read it, called Drive by Dan Pink. And he articulates that there are 3 aspects of work that are really motivational to individuals: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And one of the things we do at the end of this class that I teach is we ask people to write a 6-word legacy that they want to leave as an inspiring leader. So anyway, I'm going to stop it there. So I guess my summary is, I truly believe culture fuels results. I think the ability to be someone who motivates and inspires and drives results leads to being a better leader. I think you can teach someone to be a more inspiring leader. You don't have to teach them to be Winston Churchill, but I think the 5 things that we talked about can make people a more inspiring leader. And with that, I'm going to stop, and hopefully I didn't go too far over, and I'll take any questions, or we can have a discussion around all the things that you wanted to talk about.